So I'll never forget that trip. You know how you can do the same trip over and over and over again, but there's always one that kind of sticks out in your brain that says, man, I'll never forget that trip. So every year when I was a youth pastor down in Lexington, Kentucky, I would take my youth group from that church out to a camp called Burnham Wood. It's a Christian camp. And Burnham Wood was this beautiful camp that sat right in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, it was just gorgeous. And every year, one of the highlights of that trip was when we would take the whole group and we would hike up Mount Baldy. Now, Mount Baldy earned its name, and I'm not looking at anybody in particular this morning. I'm just looking through the crowd, okay? But Mount Baldy, when you drove up towards camp and you were still miles away, you look at the foothills and the higher hills and the mountains, and the highest hill is covered with all these gorgeous trees, like in the Appalachians. But they had one spot that was just this outcrop of rock, and it was bald, and that was Mount Baldy. And every year, the kids absolutely love climbing Mount Baldy. And so we did the same thing every year. A certain day of the week, after lunch, we left the mess hall. We walked out past the bathhouses, out around the boys' cabins, which smelled a lot like the outhouses, bath shower area. And then we got on the trail, 1.2 mile hike, pretty much uphill, like steep uphill, the whole way to Mount Baldy. And the whole way up there, like, yeah, talking, excited. We're climbing the mountain. Halfway up, we stop. Take a rest, get a drink, keep going the whole way to the top. They're talking the whole time. We get to the top, and they stop talking. They stop talking. They get to the top, and they just look, and this is before selfies and phones, with cameras on them. They just stop, and they look, and they're like, wow. This is a spectacular view from the top of Mount Baldy. And so they're kind of sitting there, maybe in groups of 2 or 3, just taking it all in, talking lowly. It's kind of quiet. And then I hear the sound. Did you ever hear the sound that a teenage girl makes when something is like so frightening that she wants to scream, but she's so afraid she can't even scream, so there's like this squeak kind of comes out? You ever hear that from a teenage girl? So I hear this teenage girl squeak, and I look over, and one of our teenage girls is sitting on a ledge, like not the edge. I want that irresponsible, like to help her fall off or anything, but she's on the ledge. And her feet are just hanging on some rocks, and she's looking down, and she's just terrified of something. And so I went over behind her, and I looked down over her shoulder, and there's a copperhead snake had crawled out from under the rock she was sitting on, and it was just waving its head back and forth right between the lower part of her legs, and its tongue's going in. Oh, is that too much? Okay, cancel the tongue. Take that back. No tongue. Just waving its head right between the lower part of her legs, and she is terrified. And I'm thinking, this is not what we want, right? The last thing I need is for one of my kids to get bit by a venomous snake. We're over a mile from camp, which is miles and miles and miles from anywhere that we could get help. We don't want this to happen. And so I had to come up with a plan really fast. I grabbed two of my teenage boys, and I pulled them in. I said, you take that arm, and you take that arm. Don't do anything until I tell you to. I took my shirt off. I said, I'm going to drop my shirt on the head of the snake. And the moment it drops on the snake's head, you yank her out of that space. They're like, okay, we got this. Football players, we got her. And so I have my shirt. I'm dangling it over the head of the snake, and I go, 3, 2. And before I got to 1, that snake crawled back under the rock it came out of. You can all breathe, like, did it bite her? No, it crawled back under the rock, and they didn't stop the boys. They're like, 1, and they just cranked her out of, like, she landed like 10 feet back, but she was safe. Everybody's cheering, because everybody's by now been looking, like, there's a, venomous snake, and, she's going to get bit. And so everybody's happy, and they're talking, and now it's loud again on top of the mountain, and they're all super excited. And the whole way back down the mountain, like, yip, 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 the whole way, that snake, did you see that? I saw that snake. It was, like, huge. And is that a snake on the trail? Like, everything that moved on the way back down became a snake, right? The whole way down to talk about the snake. And then something interesting happened. We get down to the bottom of the hill, off the mountain, and the talk about the snake stopped. Like, there wasn't another word about it. Maybe here or there before they went to bed, but they got back into their normal routines. They got back into, like, oh, we're going to go play gaga ball. We got to go set up for dinner. We're going to clean our cabin. And the moment they got back into normal routine and normal stuff, talk about the miracle on the mountain, they called it, talk about that blessing on the mountain, absolutely stopped. It's like it happened, it was great, we cheered it, we received it, we held on to it, but it's like the blessing was left on the mountain. And I wonder if that's ever happened to you. Like God does something great in your life, maybe something small or something big, it doesn't matter, but you're like, wow, this is great, God, thank you, I needed that today, and God just pours a blessing into your life, this is great, and He puts it right in your hand, and you close your hand over it, your fingers over it, like this is so wonderful, but it doesn't go any further than you. And you come off that mountain, and you've left the blessing on the mountain. And I wonder if there's a way we could do more with the blessings that God pours into our lives. I wonder if you and I could learn, instead of when God puts a blessing in your hand, instead of closing your fingers around it, what if you left your hand open and God could say, I'm blessing this to you so it can be used through you to bless others? Like what if you started using God's blessings in your life to bless the lives of other people so that Jesus can begin to change their lives? Well, friends, welcome into the first week of our brand new message series called Focus. You know, it's amazing to me how Jesus, when He was always surrounded by crowds, like hundreds and thousands of people always around Jesus, how He found the time and the ability to focus on like one person or two or three people. It's just in the middle of the crowd, sometimes between the crowd, sometimes in the middle of the crowd, and He would pour into them, He would speak into them, He would work in their lives, and it always ended up being a changed life. I wonder if you and I could learn to focus on the people right around us and take the blessings that God gives us and pour it into those lives around us so that Jesus changes their lives. We're going to talk about that a bit this morning, and to get started, we're going to climb a mountain. If you've got your Bibles or you've got your device, just tap your app, Matthew 17, verses 1 through 9. It is on screen for you this morning if you don't have a Bible, but we really want you to get used to opening your Bible. We want you reading the Word of God. We want you interacting with it. Like, this is what God says, and this is what it means. So always practice that. Have a Bible with you. Put it on your phone. Download the Bible app. But tap your app, open up to Matthew 17, verses 1 through 9. We'll walk and talk our way through these verses this morning. So here's what Matthew writes. Verse 1, after 6 days, Jesus took with Him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. So context, here's Jesus. He's got 1,000 people around Him. He looks at the crowd. He takes these three, and He pulls them away from the crowd. He's going to focus on just them. He leads them up this mountain by themselves. Verse 2, then He was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and His clothes became as white as the light. Just then, there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. So here's what's happening. Moses is like the Old Testament deliverer. He's the guy that God sent to His people when they were slaves in Egypt. Some of you may remember that. They've been slaves in Egypt. Hey, I'm going to free my people. I'm going to lead them to a promised land, the land I promised to give them. And Moses, you're my guy. You go free them. And so Moses did that. He's the deliverer of the Old Testament. He wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So this is Moses, right? And next to him is standing this guy named Elijah. And Elijah was the prophet of the prophets. He was like the most popular prophet. And so Peter and James and John are standing there looking at Moses and Elijah. And understand, Moses and Elijah, they're the guys that Peter, James, and John had posters of in their rooms when they were kids. Like with all their stats and all their wins, they're the guys that are their heroes. They want to grow up and be like Moses and Elijah. So they're standing there. And then there's Jesus standing there. But it's not normal Jesus. Like, this is not the Jesus they're used to. They've seen Jesus do amazing things, like miracles. Like, they saw Jesus heal people. They watched Jesus feed thousands of people with like one little lunch. They saw Jesus walk on water. They even watched Jesus raise a dead girl back to life. But every time they watched Jesus do these miracles, He was Jesus that looked like a man. Right? He's dressed like them. He's wearing the robes and the chacos. He looks like a normal man. But on the mountain today, He did not look like a man. This is Jesus looking like God. And he's shining in front of them. They've never seen Jesus like this. They've never seen anything like this. So here's what happened. Verse 4. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. You bet it is, Peter, right? I mean, aren't you a little envious? Wouldn't it be great if you could just have Jesus come down into your den one day, like halftime during the game today, and he just says, hey, by the way, I'm here. La! And he's just radiant and glorious. Would that be okay with you? Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing? It's good for us to be here. Yeah, it was. Really good for you to be there, Peter. Way to go. So it's good for us to be here. And Jesus, if you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Peter's like, this is amazing. This is amazing. Jesus, you're right. Guys, you seen this? Jesus is glowing, right? And there's Moses and Elijah. This is amazing. What a blessing. He's like, I got it. This is an amazing blessing, and you're giving it to me, and I've got it. And Peter receives it, but he closes his hand around it. He says, hey, can we just stay here? We don't have to go back down there. Let's build 3 shelters. Let's just build 3 little huts, and we can just stay on the mountain, and we'll just keep the blessing all to ourselves. That's Peter's idea. But listen to what happened next, verse 5. While Peter was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. And can I just be honest? This makes me laugh. I kind of get a kick. It kind of cracks me up. Here's why. They're standing there with Jesus glowing, right? Jesus is so bright. He said he's as bright as the sun. His clothes can't contain it. In fact, his clothes, they get as bright as he is. So he's like this ball of light. Jesus is ball of light. And there are these 2 guys with him. One who lived over 1,400 years ago from this time, and the other was 850 years ago from their time, and that doesn't scare them. They wait till the fog comes down. Oh, fog, I'm afraid, right? If I was standing with them, and Jesus is glowing, and these guys who've been gone for 1,000 years appeared, I'd have been on my face a long time ago. But these guys wait until the fog gathers and the cloud comes down, and now they're terrified. Verse 7, but Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. So Jesus has given them this amazing blessing. And let me tell you why I think it's a blessing. I think that Jesus understood where these guys were. Remember who these guys were? Peter, James, and John? These guys were legit businessmen. They owned their own business. They're fishermen. They had a business, and they did well at their business. They had a fleet of boats, had all their own nets. They didn't lease. They owned everything. And probably had a great website. And so they had this great business. They had their own businesses. And they left their nets and they left their boats to follow Jesus. One of them we know had a family. One of them we know had a home there with his mother-in-law and his wife and whoever else was a part of their family. And now he's on the road 24/7. These guys have given up everything to follow Jesus. One day they just made the decision. Hey, there's Jesus. He wants to follow him. They dropped everything. They said, this is going to be great. We're going to follow the one who is the one. This is the Messiah. And they begin to follow Jesus thinking, this is going to be so fantastic. And guess what? It wasn't so fantastic. It wasn't as good as they thought it was going to be. Life following Jesus was super hard. People they met didn't always like them. Their friends dropped them. Their family probably disowned them. Their own countrymen didn't want anything to do with them. And the rest of the world ridiculed them. Life was hard. They probably had a lot of days of thinking, why did we sign up for this? I think Jesus recognized how hard life had been for them. And so he's standing there with this crowd, knowing what he was about to go do. And he looks at the crowd and he says, I want you, and I want you, and you. You 3 come with me. And he leads them up the mountain by themselves to give them a glimpse of his glory. Now, Luke, when you read the same account in the Gospel of Luke, Luke tells us that Jesus took them up there to pray. Well, they could have prayed at the bottom of the hill. They could have prayed halfway up the hill. Why did Jesus show them his glory? Like, let's be honest, they didn't bring much to the table, right? Jesus could have met with Moses and Elijah by himself, handled all the business up there without them. Why did Jesus let them see what he let them see? I think because Jesus knew they needed it. How many of you, when you're going through a hard time, a hard season of life, maybe your faith is being challenged, wouldn't it be great if Jesus just kind of showed you his glory? Like, wouldn't that just be a great pick-me-up? I think Jesus knew they needed it. So he shows them his glory. Peter's like, hey, let's stay up on the mountain. But that wasn't an option. Being given a glimpse of God's glory made it okay to go back down to where real life happened. Down at the bottom of the mountain where kids get sick and loved ones pass away, where sometimes work is just so tedious and games get lost and people sometimes are just jerks. I think Jesus knew something, and so he let them see his glory, because seeing God's glory on the mountain made it okay to live in the valley. And that was good for these guys. They really needed that. But it was more than that. Even though they had to go back down, at least now they've seen it. They've experienced this amazing blessing. And at first, to be honest, it almost sounds like Jesus said, hey, I've given you this blessing. Just hold on to it. Close your fingers around it. Don't tell anybody. Let's keep this between us. So when they get to the bottom of the mountain, they can't talk about it. Why would Jesus tell them, don't tell anybody? Because it wasn't his time. Jesus had more work he had to do. Jesus knew that if everybody had seen what they saw at that point, that things wouldn't go the way they were supposed to go. They would want to make him king right away. They wouldn't let him go through the process. He knew he had to die on the cross first. And then, once he was raised from the dead, then no holds barred, right? Then you go tell everybody, you go tell the world. And that's exactly what they did. They began to tell everybody about it. But until then, they weren't supposed to tell anybody about it. See, Jesus knew that he knew the life they lived and like behind them, but he also knew the lives in front of them. He knew that there would be a day when it would be good for other people to hear and know the blessing they've received on the mountain. And it didn't take long for him to show them that. They come walking down the mountain, and the first thing they encounter is need. They get down off the mountain, and there's this huge crowd, like thousands of people, and out of the crowd comes one guy, and he throws himself at Jesus' feet. He says, Lord, will you heal my son? He has terrible seizures, and they throw him into the fire, they throw him into the water. It's going to kill him one day. Can you heal my son? I took him to your guys, and your guys couldn't get the job done. I need you to heal my son. And I wonder if in that moment, Jesus looks over at Peter and James and John. They've just come off the mountain. I wonder if Jesus gives them a look saying, there's going to be a day when this guy needs to have the blessing you just received from the mountain. Because for him right now, life is really, really hard. And Jesus heals the little boy. And I think that Peter, James, and John got the message because when the time was right, man, when Jesus was raised from the dead, they told everybody. They wrote about it. Like John writes, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only. They gave their lives for it. They flipped the blessing they'd received in private and become a blessing for people in public. And because they did that, so many lives have been changed. So here's a question I have for y'all this morning. When God gives you a blessing, whatever mountain it's on, when God gives you a blessing, what are you doing with it? Like first, are you receiving it? Are you recognizing that God is pouring blessings into your life every single day? And when you get that, when you see what he's doing in your life, what are you doing with it? When he puts it in your hand, are you closing your fingers around and saying, God, thank you, that's a great blessing, I need that for my life? But are you keeping it on the mountain? Are you not letting anyone else know what it was and know what it is and work in their lives? Like we want to close our fingers around it because if we don't, we're afraid we're going to lose it. And God says, oh, you're not going to lose it. In fact, I'm going to teach you how to use it. Jesus has blessed all of us in different ways. I could look out, I could begin asking, how has Jesus blessed you? How has Jesus blessed you? How has Jesus blessed you? And you got to all give me different answers. Some of you, you're blessed with just a business, like you own your own business. Some of you are blessed with crazy, insane talent at doing stuff. Some of you are blessed with a super cool position at work. Some of you have had amazing experiences. But the question is, how are you using God's blessing to bless others? Are you flipping the blessings that God's given you to begin to bless other people's lives so Jesus can change their lives? God doesn't want you leaving blessings on the mountain. He wants to bless you with an open hand, so what he does to you, he can do through you into the lives of others. Like, you ever get a day off of work when you didn't know you were going to get a day off of work? Isn't that a great day? In a moment, you know, hey, I got a day off coming up. I didn't realize to get that day off. I got a day off. You make plans for it, for all the stuff you want to do and all the stuff you want to get done, right? But what if God says, but I gave you that day off as a blessing, and I want you to enjoy it, but I gave it to you because your neighbor needs you for like 2 or 3 hours to get something done, and I'm hoping you'll flip the blessing into that person's life. Or what if you get like a bonus at work financially? In a moment you get a bonus at work. That's a great day, right? Ooh, I got a bonus. Can't wait to tell my bride about that. You get a bonus, and all of a sudden, you know exactly what you're going to do with it. You're going to spend it here, 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 pay that off, buy this. But what if God says, I gave you that as a blessing because I need you to take part of that and bless this person's life over here because they really need that? Are you flipping the blessings that God has given you? Here's an instance from my own life. God's working on me right now on this. So I love to get in the woods. I love to hunt. I love to sit in a tree stand. And so I went to a friend recently. I said, hey, you got this piece of property. It's not real big, but I know there are deer on it. Would you mind if I hunted on it? He said, no, have at it. Go ahead and hunt on it. By the way, that's a really big blessing for me. So if you have land and you've got a deer problem, I can help you with that. So I love you having an archery hunt. And so he gave me this blessing. I'm so excited. I'm making my plans. I'm going to start scouting it, looking through it. And then God's like, Rich, wake up. I laid a blessing in your hand and you just did this with it. Like, I understand. What do you mean I did this with it? It's like you just closed your fingers around it. Open your hand, look at the blessing, and think about your neighbor. Uh-oh. See, I've got this neighbor who, they're pretty new. They just moved in about a year ago. Mom, dad, 2 teenage kids. Great. I love them. Great family. But they're new. He hunts. Doesn't have anywhere to hunt. And at this point, I'm not even sure how close he is with Jesus, if his relationship with Jesus or not. Well, guess what I have? I have land that's like 2 minutes from our house. I have a relationship with him. I can take him down there, and I know Jesus, so I can tell him about Jesus while we're doing it. And so I went back down to the landowner, and I said, would you mind if it's not just me, but if I brought a friend down? Because I think there's room maybe for 2. And God's like, yeah, there is, right? I said, would you mind if I brought a friend down? He said, no, have at it. So now I need to go talk to him and say, would you like to go hunt this piece of property with me? And I can take the blessing God has given me, flip it into his life, and that translates into, by the way, can I tell you about what Jesus has done in my life? That's flipping blessings, and that's pretty cool. My question is, are you flipping the blessings that God has given you into the lives of others? When God puts a blessing in your life, don't close your hand. Keep it open and watch what God does with it. Whatever the blessing is, I think God wants to show you that he wants to bless you and bless you and bless you so that he can bless others through you. Just let him do it. And that's a culture we're trying to create here at Community Church. We call it radical generosity. And here's what radical generosity is. Let me just define radical generosity. If you've been with us for a couple years, you know we do this every fall, radical generosity. Radical generosity is when you take what Jesus has done for you, like how he has blessed you, and you flip it to bless someone else. Radical generosity is when you take what Jesus has done for you, how he's blessed you, and you flip it to bless somebody else, to lead them to Jesus. That's what we're inviting you to be a part of. When you take the blessings in your life, like when you take your time, when you take your talents, when you take your finances, and God's blessed you with those, when you flip those over, you begin to pour them into someone else's life, that's when you let Jesus change those people's lives and you partner with Jesus to do that. And friends, can I remind you, that's exactly what Holy Communion was about.